Quality Management Committee to order, Thursday, April 20th. Eric is on vacation this week, and John Waterbury is a little delayed, but will be coming, and he is part of our discussion of the first item. So I'm going to actually move to the second item and then take up the first one when John gets here. So that was a briefing on a Title V meeting held by DEP in Boston. Eric was notified that this gathering was taking place and asked to see if she could attend. And I think she sent to you a synopsis, right? No, maybe not?
No.
Did I send it? Oh, I didn't send it. That is true. That's okay. I was going to go through it.
Okay, go through it.
Okay.
And then I will send it. I'm just writing myself a note.
I'm
to
sorry.
send the synopsis.
So we should just say as background that DEP, because of all of the efforts that various towns are making, looking at various kinds of modifications to septic systems, has sort of used that as a springboard to gather a whole host of comments, and you're going to go into what they are, that relate to Title V. And so it was synopsis of suggested regulations, revisions from external stakeholders. Could be anybody. Okay, Sia?
Right, so it was a very interesting meeting because there were quite a broad group of people. There were home builders, so quite a contingent of home builders and their lobbyists were there. The real estate industry and their lobbyists were there. The Buzzards Bay Coalition, a few towns. The camping industry representative was there, and the Cape Cod Commission and other regulators were there. So the look at Title V, initially, my expectation was that this was going to be about the things that we care about, nitrogen and performance. But as much as it had that component, it had, we need to loosen up these regulations, and we don't need these setbacks, and we don't need this and that and the other thing coming from the home building industry and real estate developers. So it was quite a broad spectrum of comments. And so what I found at being at the meeting is the impetus for this really did start with developers and wanting to look at Title V and trying to streamline the process so that different developments could be built. And I'm going to go into that. So there was that a really broad stakeholder group, I would say, was there. And one of the interesting facts that they presented to start was that 50% of the towns in Massachusetts have at least 50% of their land in septic systems. So across the state, septic systems.
You mean 50% of the land by, like if you live on a 1 acre lot?
By zoning.
Or the size of your leaching field?
1 acre lot.
Okay.
So if you take the land area and so basically it's the idea that towns are only partially sewered in many cases. Yeah. And that sewering is less than 50% of the area of the town.
Right, okay.
So
well, that would make sense because sewering is really in dense areas.
Yes,
and so even towns that have a dense area often have a rural area as part of their geography.
Yep.
And that clearly would be on septic systems.
So Title V impacts the state significantly.
Yes.
And so that was, I thought, an interesting realization. I think of septic systems for the Cape, but absolutely it's a statewide phenomenon. So that was interesting. And with that, I think that puts a little bit of the context for the different, and I do apologize, I meant to send this. This was sent from DEP, this list of the suggestions, but I will send it out, and we are able to send comments. So I'm just going to forward the email where everybody can go see what all the comments are that are coming in and then respond back if they want. So I'm going to go through each one very quickly. There are these different areas of categories of interest, and one is allowing holding tanks for peak flows. So there's a broad discussion about the size that are required by flows, and if you have an annual average versus a peak. And so instead of designing a system for a peak flow, which doesn't necessarily allow the system to actually function optimally, the home building industry is saying, can we use holding tanks to cover peak flow periods? And I don't think we should get into the pros and cons of all these. I'm just going to list them, and then we can discuss them or not.
We may come back to the ones that are more interesting.
Relevant to us. So
Yeah.
the first one is holding tanks for peak flows. The other one is to allow tie-ins if a on-site system, that's a cluster system, has extra capacity, to allow by right neighboring properties to tie in. These are sort of tweaks to the regulations, because right now you can't. The other is the designation of nitrogen-sensitive areas, which was a big flag for us. And to allow those without changes to Title V or surface water quality standards. So the idea is to allow DEP, for nitrogen loading purposes, to actually designate these without changes in state law. Right now, you can designate a nitrogen, or DEP can designate them, but there's state law changes that have to happen. Hi Doug, we're just going through a synopsis of the Title V meeting that was in Boston and what the different stakeholders are asking for changes in Title V.
So, see, that last one would be one that the developers would not want, presumably, right?
And towns may not want it either. So, to have DEPs
Right.
say, okay,
Yep,
this is a nitrogen-sensitive area, and we have authority over you, without actually having some legal process, I think we would want to have.
Well, there must
Right.
be criteria. You couldn't just suddenly say, we're putting you inside this bubble.
Yes,
Right.
right, there must be criteria then.
yep. And then the other piece of this, which was promulgated by the Cape Cod Commission, was to have new nitrogen standards for innovative alternative septic systems at 10 milligrams per liter.
Excellent.
So I thought that was a very interesting development.
Okay, and the Cape Cod Commission submitted that suggestion?
Yes, they are actually the ones promoting this whole category, which is the allowing the designation of nitrogen-sensitive areas without changes to Title V or the water quality standards. And it says, allow DEP, well, for future designated nitrogen-sensitive areas, additional requirements for enhanced treatment to address nitrogen, and the discussion was about 10 milligrams per
10
liter.
milligrams per liter, okay, that's good.
And then there were two related to camps, seasonal camps and tent site camps. For the tent sites, allowing what they called moldering privies. So basically,
In technical terms.
composting toilets.
They're
in
composting.
these tent-only sites, and also changing the flow regulations. So the way a summer camp or cabins have to calculate their flow, they're putting these huge wastewater treatment systems in, and so they were asking for some relief from that. So that's for the camp. And then one that came from the camping industry and a couple of towns in Greenfield is allowing the leachate from composting toilets to be used on non-food crops. So that's a change in Title V regulations, but it would say all that leachate and urine ostensibly could be used as fertilizer on non-food crops, as opposed to what has to happen now is either buried 5 feet under the ground or sent away. So those are also interesting. So there's really a lot of threads to this whole regulatory discussion. One from the home builders was creating starter home zoning. And this is different than affordable housing because these homes would not count in the affordable housing stock, but it would allow a town to create designated zones, 6 to 8 houses per acre, relief from Title V setback requirements, so that higher density development for starter homes could be built. And the home builders talked a lot about wanting, buying an acre of land, if you can only put one house on it, it costs X, but it's less expensive, blah, blah, blah. The usual things that builders say about why things are expensive. But it would be town instituted. So a town would change their zoning to allow this new classification of zoning different than cluster, because cluster still requires all the land. This would basically do a high-density area zoning. A lot of pros and cons.
Too bad John isn't here. We bring that, I mean,
He will be.
either there's a technical reason for the setbacks now, or there isn't. I mean, how rich or poor you are has nothing to do with how far your leachate moves under the ground.
Well,
How much you
anyway.
can afford to spend on your house.
Sure.
It's a,
Sure. And the other piece of it, and so the next regulation feeds into this, is there's a recommendation not to allow local Board of Health regulations to be any more strict than Title V.
That's a big one.
That's,
Yes.
that's a really big one.
So,
And conservation.
Ron?
no, I was just going to say that, with the setbacks and things, one of the critical things, if you've ever built a house on the Cape or anywhere, is the setback from the, and you had well water.
Yes.
That was, I don't know how effective it is, basically, but there's like 100-foot distance. It's like the wetland. You have to be away from your neighbor and your own systems, so, but that's one of the setback things. About property lines and things, I'm not sure, you might be able to.
right, and that's
get
a
variance.
technical, a legitimate technical concern.
Right, right.
With a legitimate technical answer.
Yeah,
That has
well,
nothing to do with how much house you can afford.
well, it might have to do with place, I don't know I don't know if that's what they're talking about.
Well,
Is
what
that-
they're talking
They're
about
not
is if
talking
you've
about how
got
much
an
house you can
acre
afford,
and
they
you
think.
want to put 6 to 8 houses on
Right.
it, you need to have some sort of a relief from the distance to your foundation and your distance to the lot line and those kinds of relief. And it segued into a conversation about should innovative alternative septic systems be allowed to reduce the separation to groundwater. And so there was this very interesting discussion about these things need to be science-based. However, what George Heufelder was saying is, well, whose science are you looking at? There's science from,
Well, there's
researchers.
alternative
And
science
there's-
about
well,
alternative systems.
And if you're a consultant working for developers, you have certain sets of data that are certain sets of data, and then you have other sets of data. But the idea of the separation to groundwater is a pretty significant change, because the innovative alternative septic system is not designed to remove pathogens. And so the idea that just because they're reducing nitrogen, they're reducing pathogens, this was kind of a surprise to builders who had been promoting this approach. So a lot of these are not going to happen, they're just what people would like to see. And so these setbacks and groundwater separation issues are key. And then the sort of last category is the size restrictions and criteria for flows. Hi, John.
Hi, John. Perfect.
So right now, you need a groundwater discharge permit for flows above 10,000 gallons per day.
Right.
The idea is to make that bigger, to maybe go to 20 or 30,000 gallons per day, for reasons that relate to the cost of having to have a groundwater discharge permit for these smaller developments. And sort of married to that is the idea that you would have this small flows or medium flows category that is something above a 4 or 5 bedroom Title V system, but below what this new groundwater discharge permit limit would be. John, we're just talking about this, I don't know, what smorgasbord of proposals and recommendations and suggestions for changing Title V is. And so I just went through them, and that was sort of the last one. So it's the size of regulatory standards for what volume of flows should be for different thresholds of permitting. So when I send the email, there's going to be a link where you can click on the link and read everybody's comments. Somebody took fastidious notes at this working session. The idea is to send more comments in on any of these topics or any other topic, and this is the beginning of a process. And the next step is to continue to have these meetings with stakeholders and try to home in on what makes sense and what are the pros and cons. And I think that idea of separation to groundwater is going to maybe get some technical discussion and some of the other loosening up of the regulations, so maybe we should send that around. I mean, we can talk about it now, but then send it around and bring it up again and see if, as a committee, we might want to comment on things, or individually, feel free.
Did they set a time for the next meeting? Do we-
June. The
June.
date has not been set.
Okay, all right, so, but the point is, it's not imminent. Okay, so there's time,
Before you go to the next subject?
You have to
absolutely.
go to the, yeah.
Yeah. State your name.
Hi, Doug Brown. So recently, something that's come to light is the fact that the limited scope or the limited effectiveness of the subdivision control bylaw requiring alternative or denitrifying septics. And certain people who've been forced to put these in are now questioning the town's overall plan and the fairness of the equity of the subdivision control bylaw, where, for instance, a subdivision may be built in a very remote area, not in any impact zone, but yet because subdivision control bylaw applies to the whole town, they're still forced to use the denitrifying septics. There may or may not be, planning board may be able to say, we don't require it at their discretion, like in North Falmouth, where it was a development recently that was going right out to the bay and not impacting an estuary on the way. They said, okay, we're going to, that's their call, I guess. But so the thing is that the person who was bringing up this concern pointed out a very important fact, that we don't actually have any control in the immediate areas. When a builder, say, for instance, would go and tear a house down and rebuild, he may be putting a simple Title V in the area of the greatest impact. So that made me realize, we're really on the wrong track. We really should have at least something in control. If they're going to go to the expense of spending $1 million fixing something right on the water, they can afford to do something with the septic. And maybe if sewer planning becomes imminent, we may choose to maybe delay it, as we did in Mara Vista for a little while. But unless that plan is really coming, we should have a town-wide plan. And maybe we should even ask for a decision about whether we should be giving people relief on the subdivision control bylaw until we have such a plan. And I don't know if this is the mission of the Water Quality Management Committee to propose to the planning board action about zoning for these areas of concern. I don't know what exactly, I haven't thought it through, but geez, if all this stuff I've been involved with and thinking about all this stuff, this guy had to bring this to my attention to make it so clear, what we're really not doing. So.
Well, my just initial reaction is you've hit on several different things, and part of it's going to still be under the Board of Health. I think that when you have a tear down and a rebuild, that plan goes through review, right? And that includes the Board of Health. So on an isolated case, that would be my initial reaction to that. The planning board, if it's going to look at areas that do not have a direct impact to an estuary, or 2/3 of the town are, at least 2/3 of the town are in some impacted estuary, and it may be as high as 75%. So I'm just giving a sense of proportion, that there are going to be areas, and they're actually more likely to be in the Woods Hole area where you're discharging either to Vineyard Sound or Buzzards Bay. But it's a question that hasn't been raised, and I think that I'll certainly think about it. Ron?
Yeah, I was just thinking that, one of the things that could be a starting point in a way for where these things should go and may not be needed is that we have pretty good delineated watersheds so that we know what's being impacted, at least in terms of coastal estuaries at this point. But for freshwater ponds, we have another issue, and that hasn't really been as well defined. So it's going to be, at one point people were thinking of just declaring the whole town as a nitrogen-sensitive area, but
Yeah.
I mean, in a way
And that still may happen.
That may still happen, yeah, but it's still. These things are bigger than just being on the shore of something. I mean, it's,
Absolutely.
as you know
I didn't
very
mean
well.
to imply it was only the
Yeah.
shores of estuaries, but
Yeah.
just areas of concern.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Right.
one of the other issues from the Board of Health's perspective is, so the planning board has said, in certain situations, these IAs have to go into developments. That then is left to the Board of Health to monitor those. And the county actually keeps records on them. We mandate that each of them has to have a maintenance contract in perpetuity. And there's a certain sampling protocol in the first year. They can then come to the Board of Health and ask for a reduction in that in subsequent years. But we've had a real problem in the last year of people just deciding they're not going to keep their maintenance contracts. So we have about 18 or 20 that we've been trying to track down, and it's been a nightmare. And one of the things which I think this committee is going to need, we do not have a non-criminal citation ability in the Board of Health. So we can, if someone, for instance, doesn't obey our smoking regulations, we can issue a non-criminal citation. But we have no potential for an order of the Board of Health. In other words, if we issue an order of the Board of Health for a non-criminal citation to get these people to pick up their maintenance contracts, we do not have that ability at the moment. And I think that's something that this committee will need in the future, and that we need to ask for fall town meeting to adjust.
But I would ask, you might consider the equity issue first and the amount of planning that we do or do not have in place before we push too hard on that. Because, I mean, looking at the big picture, there may be some unfairness to the way it's being determined right now. So,
Well,
The other thing that I think we need as a town to keep in mind is when we know that, let's just take Little Pond as an example. If we had willy-nilly been asking people in the Little Pond watershed to put in $30,000 IA systems, and then we turn around and ask them to vote in a town election to approve a sewer system for that area of town, I think you can count on a number of no votes. So I think we need to think fairly critically about, if we know that at some point sewering is going to happen in a certain area, we don't want to be asking people to put in $30,000 IA systems.
absolutely, and that was my first sentence.
This is what we have a long history in the the Board of Health. In New Silver Beach, we didn't ask people to upgrade those systems when we knew that we were going to sewer that area. And we did the same thing in Little Pond. We've had lots of failures of septic systems in the last year in Little Pond. And we simply said, hey, we know that sewer is going to be turned on in X number of months. You just have to put an alarm in your failed system and have it pumped if you need to.
Right.
And we'll carry you until that hookup is possible.
Right.
And those are the kind of things that I think, as we're thinking about long-range planning, that we have to be careful about what we're asking people to do.
Right.
Right.
Well, as we roll into this update of the CWMP for December 2019, I think these concerns are all relevant. You wanted to say something?
well, tell me if this is sort of what you're saying in a different form, and sort of what John is saying. It's a matter of degree. We can't come up with a plan instantly, or it wouldn't be a very good plan. We could clearly take too long because we were slow or lazy or incompetent. But there's some optimum length of time, measured in probably a few years, to come up with a plan. And then but even if we come up with a recommendation, the selectmen have to vote on it, and maybe the town has to vote on it. So we can't know, in some cases, whether it's going to be, say, sewers or IAs in various locations until that whole process is finished.
Right.
But yet, so if you try to compress that in time, you get a bad process. If you take too long, people are left in limbo too long.
Absolutely.
So it's a
So I'm not trying to.
matter of degree.
I'm just trying to impart a sense of urgency and relate this situation that came brought light to my eyes about where we're really at.
Good.
And so I wonder, at our last meeting, or your last meeting, you were discussing the possibility of having townwide IAs and the large monitoring capacity that would be required. And at that time, I was wondering, you guys were talking about the DPW possibly managing the monitoring program. And I wonder if that should be like the first priority, and maybe there could be some relief for residents that are dealing with these IAs now. They find it expensive and cumbersome. If we could implement that program early and start to address these people's concerns and help them in whatever way we can, maybe that would be a bridge between the, what's happening now and what our planning for the future.
I think we probably will need a separate conversation, and you can be more specific about where and what the troubles are with the particular IAs and so on. We are, at this meeting, going to go through the next iteration of the protocol on IAs, and we are thinking that this would be, well, I shouldn't say townwide. No, at this point, it's really just a format that we're working on. Thank you, Doug. Thank you. Okay. Anything more we want to say about the Title V meeting?
Yeah, no, I would just like to, again, just pass this, you can each have a copy of this, it's not a big deal, but it sort of is a segue between that discussion and the next one.
And the next one.
Next one, it's a little bit, I mean, we can talk about it as we go
So
along.
there's nothing else that we want to talk about in terms of the briefing of the meeting in Boston? Or is
Well,
this related to the briefing?
Are we going to respond to it? You said they're asking for responses. Is it appropriate for this committee or for some part of Falmouth that we correspond with to respond to their questions?
Okay. I think since the document, the two-page list of suggestions that they discussed wasn't forwarded to the committee, that I'd prefer to put it on as another agenda item after you've all had a chance to review it, and then we'll decide whether there's going to be a formal comment from this committee.
What's the deadline that they're imposing?
She said June.
Well,
I'm sorry, June's the next meeting.
June is the next meeting. They're taking comments on an ongoing basis. And I think I summarized what was on the sheet, which was very, bullet points. The thing to really do is go in and look at the link to all the meeting notes on a particular topic, and I think we can pick out which ones are relevant to nitrogen removal.
Yeah.
And then put it on the agenda to decide if the committee's going to formally respond, so.
Right, make a formal comment.
Right, now, my only last note is that in terms of what I got back from Mass DEP is that Cape Cod Commission put forward the idea of the 10 milligram per liter limit or acceptable process, but as this note says, Mass DEP hasn't approved anything under 19. Now, whether they would go from 19 to 10 in one jump might be questionable, but they might, who knows, but.
And I think a lot will have to do with the science, and the
Experience, the monitoring.
The consistency of the
Right.
data, what comes out of the test center, as to whether they're really comfortable with 10. It's hard to predict what DEP will do, but
Right.
there's no question where their position is now.
Right now, it's at 19. So
Right.
it's just a factor that, it's just a very simple statement from Brian Dudley. Just,
Right.
okay, they haven't approved anything below 19.
Right.
But this, I think, is, as we're moving ahead, even with this next agenda item, that we need to look at that in terms of a timeline or where we're going, because I think ultimately they have to give us their stamp or something.
Their stamp.
Ron, is the implication here that if a system was designed to achieve something less than 10 milligrams, they wouldn't allow it?
They haven't approved any systems.
Even though, I'm not saying they require 10, but it would seem. they
Well,
would-
like the nitrate system claims or says they can get 5,
Right.
right? And it's approved by DEP, but not for 5.
There are two things here.
Yeah,
In terms of installation, will they allow it? The answer is yes.
Okay.
If you're saying this installation reduces X amount of nitrogen, and when you add it all up, that's what the nitrogen loading is, they're going to say, no, it's going to to be 19, that they're going to stick to that
So-
number at this point.
Maybe,
yeah, so,
because
But
the
that's a
watershed
requirement,
reports.
well, it's more to do with the calculation of the nitrogen reduction credit to meeting a TMDL.
Yeah.
So it's a chain of things.
Right.
So it's the source, and then you have to, if you say, well, we can meet the TMDL at 10, they'll say, well, we don't agree that you can
Right.
meet 10. Okay, so that's the issue at this point, but things are changing all the time.
Yep.
It's just that this is pretty, at the moment, and how they will move and what they're considering. I don't know if there was any feedback from the Cape Cod commission's statement about 10? Was there just, they just put it out there and it,
It
Yeah.
seems that 10 is technically feasible. I mean, this is something that George Heufelder has said publicly, that there are systems that get 10, and he technically believes
Yeah.
that 10 milligrams per liter is
right. No, I understand.
practically
Yeah.
doable. And so the 19 was a standard that came from different era.
No, it's the current standard.
But
This is where
it
it
came
came
from an,
It was
Yeah.
generated.
Yeah,
it
right,
was
right, right.
generated based on the best information that was available at the time. And coming from the Cape Cod Commission and the 208 plan and other places, the impetus and the desire to have a technology that gets you 10 is being promoted, and based on years of information that George has looked at the test center, he thinks that it's technically possible to do. So that's what's driving this.
It seems to me like there's going to need to be another classification, right? Because there's places where a system that gets 19, places in the state is appropriate and perfectly fine.
Yeah,
But, so maybe you
and
call
helpful.
those the alternative, and then you call the 10s the innovative, right?
Or the enhanced, or,
Yeah,
yeah, now they're
whatever,
talking about this
enhanced,
enhanced
innovative,
category
yeah.
now.
Right. Okay, let's move back then to agenda number 1, which was innovative alternative septic systems draft management approach. And a working group has been going through iterations on this, and John, you've sort of been leading
Yeah,
the charge on that.
Can I just ask the enterprise, the last time we discussed this, you did a detailed article on it, and we're in the process of making sausage. And by presenting the sausage, you got us into a lot of trouble. So if you could use a little restraint, we're still making sausage. And we don't need an article in the enterprise describing in detail how we're making it.
Nothing is definitive. The caveat to what we're saying is this is a discussion. Nothing's been voted on, and nothing is final.
So this draft has been a working group of Steve Layton and Sia and Eric and myself who've been working on this with the help of George Heufelder. George has helped me over several weekends putting this together. It's a generic plan that was not meant to be any specific area. What we were saying is, what we're trying to do is present a plan to DEP to see if they will approve a structure for using IAs to meet TMDLs in a watershed. And we're talking about an absolutely generic watershed. It has no name. So what we've tried to do is put together a set of generic criteria that we would like to present to DEP, and some of our next steps, when we think we've got things in reasonably good shape, is for Eric and Virginia to take it to DEP, probably to Brian Dudley initially, and say, okay, here's a generic plan. React to this from DEP. And so that's sort of where we are at the moment, and that's the purpose of how we've laid this out.
Okay. There have been more sausage made since the last time we discussed this publicly. And it needs to be a public discussion because it's committee-wide. So I presume everybody's got copies, and I think we might just go through it. John, if there's anything in particular you want to point out. My memory is that you've actually made a change to this first section. So all permits must be applied to within 2 years of the start of the project. Was added in addition to the fact that they need to replace or upgrade within 4 years. And your reason for adding that additional requirement was?
So the whole project is going to be finished in 4 years. If someone, we have the possibility of getting a grant. If someone says, hey, I don't want your grant and I'm not going to play, then we say, hey, anybody who's in this sewer service, this watershed area, is going to be mandated to upgrade with an IA of this kind. And that's where we say, if you don't want the grant, by 2 years, you're going to pull a permit.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So, okay.
Ron?
No, I was just going to say, if we go right through this paragraph by paragraph, that might be good to see if people have
Okay.
comments. And I have,
What do you
I have one. Well, I have a few here. One is, again, starting off in that first sentence where it's meeting a standard of 10 milligrams per liter. Well, it needs to be referenced to a CMR or DEP or something. This is like, we can say that for the town, whatever, but to me, there's still some ambiguity on whether, what authority there is to declare this. I guess the town can just declare.
We're just
Yeah.
telling DEP, this is what we're proposing.
Okay,
React to it.
Yeah,
All right,
Let's
okay.
call it a trial balloon. So it's
Okay.
being presented to DEP as a trial balloon with this 10 milligrams, and they can start with this first line and say, sorry,
Right.
we're
Oh, no.
not dealing with it,
Oh, no,
or
no,
they
it's a-
can work
Or
with
they
it.
can say, change that and
Right.
continue. But the other thing is, this is for both residences and cluster systems, right? So we could have, or is it just residents? I mean, just, could it
I
be?
mean, individual, single septic systems.
So it could be a business also, right?
I don't know.
It could also be a small cluster.
Yeah.
Okay, so it could be both,
Sure.
basically. Okay, well, I think that just might be some wording put in, just saying that it applies to
I don't-
business, residents, or something, yeah.
Well, it says
I don't think
designated
This is
properties. I mean,
single-family.
There you go,
Residential.
designated properties.
It's
That covers it.
however the town wishes to designate them in the future.
Right, but they may, I'm just saying that you could, if it's a designated area where they put in a subdivision, they could put in a cluster system.
Right, this doesn't
Right.
stop that.
So one of the things,
Okay.
Ron, we were trying to do is not worry about every exception, what happens in a seasonal home if I bring my aunt down for the weekend and there are 10 people in the house rather than the 2 that are there for the summer. What is that impact going to have? So we
Okay.
tried to lay this out in as general terms as we could, so that we just say, okay, here's a general case for you with a management structure. React to it. We'll worry about if you say, this is a workable, DEP says, this is a workable plan, then we'll say, fine, you've said that's great, now we're going to give you the details of what
Okay, well, I'm
we're gonna
not
try.
on the subgroup. I'm not on the subgroup, so I'm going to be the,
Well,
sort of
I
looking
think
at it from
I
a
think I
different
can
viewpoint.
Say something.
Yeah.
There are some details that I thought should be in here, but I became convinced by the other people in the working group that there's no point taking this to a final state of detail before we know whether DEP will even agree with the generalities.
Right, okay.
And
Right,
so
well,
we don't
I'm-
want to burden ourselves or them or waste the time.
Fine. And I think you did a good job.
With all those details.
I think you did a good job with that, you guys. But there might be other.
But it had to be enough detail to look serious to them.
Right. So, all right, so,
Anything else? on
yeah,
that?
in the first, I'm just wondering where it says start of the project, I mean, like with the Little Pond Sewer Service Area, the health department had to declare basically all the septic systems as failed, right? And therefore, people are then obligated to hook up within a certain time. So I'm wondering, when it says start of project,
I don't think that was the case.
no?
No,
There was a line drawn
This-
around a sewer service area, which was
that's,
defined the houses that were to be treated.
that is
and-
the legal step.
Okay.
You
so-
define a sewer service area, and the town meeting votes a sewer service area, so you know exactly whether you're in
Okay.
or you're out.
Now, does it say something like that here, kind of?
does.
Oh, it does,
Yeah.
okay. Within the watershed,
Under
is that it?
2.0.
Right, 2.0.
Okay, 2.0. Tom, did you have a comment?
Well, it could apply a couple of different places. We're making some kind of arrangement for the responsible management entity. And I was thinking later on, mainly that was involved with monitoring, but someone's got to sit down and check to see that all the punch list items have been done. And it's a reasonable time frame, but 1 year could go really fast. And I just wonder if somewhere in here you would have the RME or somebody decide, well, this person has made a good faith effort to meet this deadline, this time frame, but something came up, and we don't know what that is. So I think, it would pay somewhere in here to, and again, like Steve was saying, we don't want to have too much detail in here.
But I mean, that's a standard with the Board of Health. You can always come
Right.
and ask for a variance to something. So if someone has an extenuating circumstance in the Little
Right.
Pond Sewer Service area and says, look, we just can't
Right.
get hooked up within the 90 days of when this is supposed, can you give us some relief? And then we do that.
Yep.
But I don't think at this level,
Okay, that was, yeah, I just wasn't
We
sure, because
need
this is
to-
all new to me, and I'm just
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
pick my way through it. And then that's the first thing that occurred to me was,
Okay.
there always has to be some kind of appeal or workaround or variance.
And
Available.
that mechanism exists. And part of the reason we're having this discussion is because there are members that are not part on the working group, and so we need to all be up to speed. So, 2.0 is the watershed boundary, and it's very clear that it's delineated, it's approved by a CWMP and by town meeting. Okay, so moving on to 3, financing. This is the grant, and to install an approved IA with a standard of 10 milligrams per liter, total nitrogen. Go ahead.
And I have a suggestion that the last sentence be put as the second sentence, be moved
Funds
up.
for grants will be provided by the municipality following the necessary appropriation. You're
Right,
saying-
because it says at the beginning, awarded an incentive grant, and then, but
okay.
where's it coming from? And
Yeah,
then immediately
okay,
just
and
say
then-
that.
and
Yeah, then
to
just say that.
qualify?
I just
certainly
made
do
that
that.
change. I got the document here.
Okay.
Okay,
So
so-
John, I got that. I just
That's easy.
did it.
Very good, yep, that's,
And then,
Okay.
you know, when it says terms of the grant, I'm not sure exactly, I guess that's what they have to do to get the grant,
Right.
right?
That's
That's the
right.
terms. But then it says, at the end, the last sentence now would be failure to meet these conditions will void the grant. Does that mean they have to pay it back? Or they just don't get
we're
it?
not
They
going to
won't get
give
it.
it to them
Won't
until
get it
they've
until it's
installed
finished,
it.
until it's done, okay.
And
All
we
right.
did this with the eco toilets.
Right.
It's the
right.
exact same process.
And the same process we used in West Falmouth.
And the same process we used for the West Falmouth
Okay.
project.
Okay.
so that worked well. Any other
So-
comments on 3.0? Financing. Okay, 4.0 is the responsible management entity, which I understand is actually a technical term that's
That's a
used
DEP
by
term.
DEP. Okay, so that's where that comes from. And so these are elements related to that. So the first is the charge. The RME will be responsible for reporting TMDL compliance to DEP and meeting the annual target nitrogen reduction load for the watershed.
Yeah, I just was wondering on this, how often, I know it's a specific, but what is the standard like evaluation? How often do you have to monitor it to show that you're reaching the TMDL?
Well,
Let's
that,
say-
We're
we've
getting
got a
there.
specific
That's further
monitoring
down.
section coming up.
All right, all right, we'll look at that and see well, the monitoring section there is more about the units rather than the,
It's way at the end.
Yes,
There's
but
also a
I think I
reporting
understand
section.
your question. It has to do with the TMDL
right,
reply.
Yeah.
And that's the annual monitoring that, so far, is done during the summer by SMAST in July, August, and September. And then those values are reported
So the
to
word
DEP. So that's,
Unfortunately, we haven't hit a TMDL compliance yet
Yeah.
to know that we're supposed to be continuing to monitor. But I think DEP has said annually the same,
Same.
SMAS monitoring protocol is going to continue. So every year, the Sentinel station is going to be looked at to make sure that if you hit it one year, you keep hitting it.
so, yeah, then as I looked at this, I thought, okay, now people are going to invest in, someone said $30,000 a minute ago or something, whatever it is. And what if we don't reach the TMDL?
oh,
DEP will be very specific about that. They'll say sewer.
No, but they'll have put in all this infrastructure and then they'll say sewer, right?
Yeah.
So
that's
there's a
part of
risk.
what we're risking.
There is a risk. So it's a relatively high cost risk, actually,
Okay.
compared to a lot of things.
All right, next,
Huh?
more
More
oysters.
well, you know,
Right.
why not? The
Well,
oyster
what if
pond, they
we
won't go
sewer
there, for
And
example.
don't meet the TMDL.
That's right, we gotta check that one too.
What if we
So the
sewer
next
in it?
part is the structure
Yeah.
about the management entity. So it's under the jurisdiction of, and we have to be determined.
Yes, this is
Okay.
a major change,
Uh-huh.
that we have not specified any,
So it
Organization.
might be the Board of Health and it might be the DPW.
Okay, but, all right. There is, nothing is
We'll
designated.
We'll let DEP express a preference.
I see. Okay,
But one thing about this was, when I had a discussion with Brian Dudley, he said he was strongly in favor of such a oversight, basically.
he was.
Yeah,
Okay.
so, by
Um,
some town department.
Okay. This managing entity is responsible for record keeping, contractor supervision, and reporting to DEP. Granted right of access to private property to periodically monitor, inspect, and pump, notice pump, the IAs, and it will have the ability to enforce compliance.
Could I firm up that last sentence?
Yes.
Instead of say have the ability, can say be responsible for compliance enforcement?
Okay, that sounds
Say
good
it
to
again?
me.
It's just a little stronger.
Yes.
Will
So Sia, can you make that?
The RME will be responsible for compliance enforcement, right? Is that the simplest way to say it?
Yeah,
'Cause
fewer
if you say
words.
has the ability, it doesn't imply that they're gonna go out and
Yeah.
exercise that.
It's simpler to say it that way, it's good.
RMB was
RME, Responsible Management Entity. All right, the RME will be responsible for compliance and enforcement. Right. And I'm going to fix, we've got IAs with an apostrophe, and they shouldn't have an
Yes.
apostrophe, so I've got that.
Okay. Moving on to the next page. 4.3, approved IAs. Vendors for IAs will submit proposals documenting the technical qualifications of their systems, their agreement to meet the qualifying requirements by the management agency, including performance bonding, and I think that's an important addition. Vendors must commit to O&M training for a number of licensed inspectors sufficient to service the watershed. The RME will assemble a list of qualified vendors of systems approved for installation within the watershed. Any comments?
I just have a few,
Ron?
I'm just wondering, this is, again, this is sort of wordsmithing, but in the first sentence, it says, a couple things here. Vendors VIAs will submit proposals documenting the technical qualifications. Is it more technical specifications or qualifications?
What's the
Documented
difference?
Well, qualifications more has to do with like people, right? More like
Qualifications,
you're qualified to do
technical
something.
Specifications.
Yeah,
Specifications
he's
is
right.
fine.
Oh, I think,
The specifications.
I'm just, and then the next thing is the word, two words after that, the word their systems. Their systems, maybe we should just say something like of the installed systems, but their
No.
system sounds like it's some company that's created them.
Vendors system.
Created
It
them.
is.
It is.
their
That's
system.
exactly
the
right.
vendors, each vendor's system.
Ford,
They don't
GM, and
necessarily
Tesla are each
qualify.
going to say how fast their cars go.
I know, but there might be others who are selling their systems. The people who make them.
So there are
Well,
representatives.
it's the vendor, it's whoever
The
we
vendor.
deal with. However many subcontractors they have is their
Right,
vendor.
right, that's what I mean, I agree with that, but I'm just saying that, it sounds like one vendor could install more than one type of system, including that they have.
Then they have to
produced.
submit the technical specs for all of them.
Right. But it's not necessarily, I'm not sure, their systems means what they're selling, right? So, okay, if that's clear enough to everybody, it's okay. It just seemed to me like it was more like they had created it. And in the way I was reading it, again, it's,
But I
don't
agree
care
with you
about
on the
that.
specifications is a little better than quality.
Yeah.
Can I add to that, since one of the things we really want is the monitoring data? I mean, what we really want, I mean, technical specifications are lovely, it tells you the risers and the thises and the that's, but what we really want to qualify the systems is the monitoring data. So maybe if we're gonna change it, like, I liked qualifications, because what qualifies them is their data.
But that's the next
That's a
section.
technical spec.
That's the next section, performance monitoring.
No, that's different.
No, it surely is included intended to be included in 4.3.
Exactly.
And it is a technical spec. It's the most important
It
technical
is the
spec.
most important one, okay.
And any
So we don't
RME
need-
that didn't ask for that
Maybe
is
just
in the
add
wrong
a,
job.
say technical specifications, including proof of.
Monitoring data.
Or including, proof of meeting the 10
says the
milligram
next-
threshold, or something like that.
But it says the next line is to meet the qualifying requirements, so that sort of covers that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you've got both there.
Yeah.
I think we're okay.
Okay.
Aren't there standards, either they're certified or they're not?
Well, there,
They're going to have to prove to our entity that the specifications that they've got meet our standards. The
Yeah.
10 plus whatever else the group decides is important.
And if they don't, they have to put money in escrow? Is that what the performance bonding part is?
No, the performance bonding is that if they say their system will meet 10,
Yes,
and I'm a homeowner and I'm going to buy one of those systems, if they're not willing to guarantee that it meets 10, I'm not buying that system.
gotcha. Okay.
And the fact that it's bonded means it's a big third party, a giant insurance company that will pay you even when the little company goes belly up
To have
because
it
everybody's
replaced
mad.
if it doesn't work, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
All right, next section is performance monitoring, 4.4. Monitoring will be conducted by the RME or its contractor.
I
There-
thought,
Go ahead.
I thought this issue of the fees, who's actually, how they're actually recovering costs for the monitoring came too late. And that's fine where it is, but maybe just add a sentence after the first sentence here saying that,
Okay.
monitoring fees are covered under the semi-annual fee described in section 4.9 or something like that.
So say it again, monitoring
Monitoring fees
are, why don't we just reference the section?
or monitoring costs, yeah, are covered by a semi-annual fee described in section 4.9.
It's not just monitoring. That fee covers maintenance contract, monitoring, and pumping.
Okay. I guess the point is, I don't know, somebody might be wondering how is this, are the homeowners going to be responsible for?
I would say put in
every
a
single-
paragraph that just says C 4.9 for fees,
Put a sentence in.
because I don't like putting
Me
any
either.
number in more than one place,
Right.
because we actually made that mistake. You change it one place and not the other, and then
Mhm.
you get.
Right.
Section 4.9
disaster.
describes the
Let's just say,
fees.
after contractor, C,
C 4.9 for fees.
So, yeah,
Okay,
I have a couple things.
Okay, all right, let me get through this first paragraph.
Okay.
So, the monitoring is conducted by the RME. There shall be no ownership, management, or employee connection between any monitoring contractor and any system or maintenance vendor. Upon installation, all systems will be considered under probation and monitored as follows: bi-monthly for 1 year, and after 1 year, the mean or equivalent nitrogen load reduction has not been reached. The standard has not reached the required standard 10 milligrams. The owner shall be responsible for bringing the system into compliance within 1 year. Okay, comments? Ron?
Well, I looked up, I've always had trouble with this, but bi-monthly, I looked it up, like several
Means-
dictionaries.
Means every other month.
No, it says every 2 months or
Every
occurring
2
twice a month. If you look it up, it's got both of those options. And every.
Where'd you
every-
look it
No,
up?
semi-monthly. means-
Semi-monthly, it's a very common mistake.
Yeah,
No,
yes,
no,
very
no,
common.
Semi-monthly
no, I-
is twice a
Annual.
month.
No, look
Semi-
at Merriam-Webster's, all these dictionaries and everything, it said you had the choice.
Well, they're recognizing this error that's been made repeatedly. It's almost.
Right.
Well, anyway, why not
Okay.
just say every other month for
Just
1
write
year?
6
That makes
times
it really
annually.
clear.
Okay, so let's get around that, because it is, people do misunderstand.
Every other month.
Okay, every other month for 1 year.
Except for months with an R in them.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. And then I think
Okay.
a comma comes after 10 MDL.
Yes, it
Right.
does.
And then, now,
Next to the
Wait.
last line, 10 milligrams total nitrogen per liter, comma, the
Yeah.
owner shall be responsible.
Yep.
right, now, so if they're responsible and they don't get it into compliance in 1 year,
look down at the
Then what?
next paragraph. It specifically addresses that.
Following the first
Yeah.
year.
But before we move down, can
No, no,
I,
no,
Yes,
can I
after-
jump in?
Yeah.
To quote my friend Ron, do a little smithing. You've got two big points in one paragraph. One is the conflict issue, and I
Right.
think that's a standalone paragraph. And
Okay,
then you would have two paragraphs that are what I would call timeline, or sampling program paragraphs. So I would start a new paragraph upon installation, if that makes sense to
yes,
people.
I would
Sure.
agree.
That's fine.
And the other point is, worst case scenario, one of these things could be installed in a seasonal home in September or late August, and you would have 6 or 7 very quiet months. So I would, instead of installation, maybe initial utilization of system or some equivalent term. I see people coming up with workarounds that say, well, we'll get this thing to pass by installing it at the end of the summer for seasonal properties.
Well, you can see that it says down below that they are not going to be monitoring seasonally unoccupied
Right,
houses.
so I'm just saying then maybe change the wording up here because it says upon installation, all
He
systems.
has a good point, John. We went over and over this in the second paragraph, but we never realized that we didn't fix it for the first paragraph.
Yeah, so
Well, it
I,
doesn't matter, though, and I'll tell you why.
Oh.
You're monitoring it for the whole year,
right,
every other month. And so you would, if you started in September or if you started in June,
right,
you're still going to get every other month and a whole bunch a month that is
Right.
unoccupied.
right,
So
okay.
it doesn't actually matter.
Okay.
And I think this is where, you're going to have an intelligent person running this
Yeah,
management entity, and they're going to take into account things like
Right.
this. I mean, that's the kind
Okay.
of stuff that we do all the time.
But it's also,
that's
it's
fine.
going to
But
be,
anyway, I was just trying
you know,
to,
it's, where you start in the calendar, you're still going to go every other
okay,
month.
that's
Right?
a fine point. The other thing right there, I would drop as follows. All systems will be considered under probation and monitored every other month for 1 year,
Okay.
because you don't need as follows in
Sure.
there.
Right.
There is still a problem, though, because if it's a seasonal home, and you're monitoring it every other month, and a whole bunch of those measurements are done when there's no flow,
Right,
what's the reading, and how does it affect the average? You're either giving them, I can't believe that it comes out right. You're either giving
I
them
can't
a
either.
buy forever. If the winter readings are all 0, it's going to be trivial for them to meet the average.
Yeah.
If they're all really high, they're screwed.
Yes.
They can never meet the average. And I don't know which it is, because I don't know enough about how these things work when they're not working.
I think this is a case where, if we try and deal with the minutia, we're going to lose it.
yeah, it's a good point, John.
Yes, I
mean,
agree with that,
What
too.
we're trying to do is just give DEP a skeleton of a plan, get them to say, basta, we like this. And then we come back and say, hey, but we got all these exceptions, and you've already said this works, so deal with our exceptions.
So if they notice that when Eric and Virginia take it to them, then Eric and Virginia say, what you just said, look, this is a first draft, we're not going to
Well, if they,
polish it until you say yes to the general idea, but then, yes, you got a good point, we've got to fix this up for seasonal homes.
And we
Yeah.
probably will have to have one set of criteria for year-round homes and a separate one. Like seasonal homes will probably be treated separately. So I think we should think about this as the year-round, single-family home straw man.
And the argument that George Hoyfelder always makes is that if it's only occupied 3 months a year, it's already got a huge reduction. 9 months of the year, it's putting 0 nitrogen in.
You know,
But I think we should see this as the single-family home for year-round occupancy, your base case.
Right.
And then we'll have, subsections for other.
Okay, so the first paragraph is now 2 paragraphs.
Yep.
The second one starting upon installation. Any other comments on the old first
No,
paragraph?
I
Ron?
still have the same question, because the way the last sentence reads, a home could be out of compliance for 2 straight years, okay?
Yes,
yep,
Right?
yes.
And then it reverts to probation status, but it was in kind of probation status after the first year. That's what it says in terms
Yep.
of not meeting it. So what happens after 2 years of non-compliance? Do you say, oh, here you go, you can do 3 more tests, according to the next paragraph,
well,
and then if you pass, you're
No,
okay?
there are 2 ways of dealing with that. One is if you have a home that has a system with very high input,
Right.
60 milligrams per liter, and they're getting 75% reduction of that. In other words, getting down to 15. You say, okay, that house is getting a 75% reduction. And we let that go. And we say that in here,
Farther on.
farther on.
Oh,
And
okay. And then the average is okay because somebody gets 5.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so on to the second paragraph. Following
Third
the first year, 1/12, and this is for discussion, but anyway, 1/12 of the systems will be monitored each month. Properties chosen for monitoring that month will be picked at random, excluding properties monitored within the previous 11 months, and unoccupied seasonal homes. These samples are in addition to samples referenced in 4.6 below, that's under operation and maintenance. If at any future time a system is found to not meet the 10 milligram per liter standard or equivalent nitrogen load for 3 successive measurements, it will revert to probation status and be treated as above. Above meaning,
The first paragraph.
The first
Which
paragraph.
now actually the second paragraph.
right, well, as above still works then. Okay. Comments on that paragraph?
I'm just
Ron?
wondering, you mentioned the 1/12, I don't have any real opinion about 1 out of 12, but 1 of 12 of the systems in compliance, maybe we should say in compliance after that, because we're just going to use the ones that have
This
not
is-
No, that's
meeting
the
it.
whole
No,
idea.
this is
You
forever.
do it randomly, so you,
To make sure they're staying in
Right,
compliance.
randomly among those in compliance is my
no,
point.
you want to
No,
catch the ones that
Total
aren't in
systems.
compliance. And by
Right.
not
Well, the
assigning,
number not in compliance had better be a small fraction, or we've got a problem.
It says following the first year, just after the first year, those in compliance, the ones that are not in compliance, you would still have to monitor more often. It says following the first year. So if you have 50 of them in there, and 40 of them are doing okay, and 10 of them are way off the chart,
well,
then I would include the 40 in the 1 in 12 club, or 36, make it a number.
but I mean, Ron, we've done that. We said if you're not in compliance, you're going to revert to the top. So in essence, what that is saying, those are the ones that we think at the moment are in compliance. And by picking randomly, we're trying to catch ones that might drop out of compliance.
And
Well,
and
that
does this
does make
mean with the
sense.
formulation that every system will be monitored at least once a year?
Right.
3 times a year.
Well,
Under this, once a year.
on this,
Under
yeah,
this,
we're
under
here
this,
once a
once a
year.
year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
You're right.
And then that 11 months goes back to previous calendar year. I'm just trying to figure out what it would look like the second year if you're only taking the ones that weren't. Then,
You got a bigger pool the next.
but no, the following year, unless you start the calendar year over again.
You
Is
do.
that the plan?
That's the plan.
Because that's not clear here, because I would be looking back the previous 11 months, and then you're locked.
Then
No,
you're
but you
locked
see,
into the
You're locked
same-
into the same.
It's random the first
every
year, but
June.
then the next
Right,
year, it's
and then every
no
year
longer
after
random.
that. Am I looking at the numbers right?
No, you're exactly right. The way that it's written, you would,
Yeah,
after
it
the
needs
first
to
year,
be-
you would be locked into repeating
So how do
the
we
first
fix
year
that?
schedule.
You have to have a reset time.
You
After the
reset.
first year, and you may be monitoring one you monitored the month before.
Right.
It may only be
Which is
30
why I
days.
was suggesting September before, so then you get the unoccupied ones at the end of the year.
Well,
But.
but with the present thing, whoever was monitored in June is going to be monitored every June after that. Whoever
Which
was.
you don't want them to know that.
That's
Right, that's my point.
Okay, so we need to
So I
fix
think
that.
you just put in a phrase that says the monitoring, the random monitoring schedule will be reset every 12 months.
Right.
Whenever it's,
Okay.
Yeah, he's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just get rid of the excluding properties monitored within the previous
Yeah.
12 months.
Yeah.
And replace
That's all
it
we
with
have
what
to do is
Tom-
get rid of
Right.
that.
Yeah.
yeah.
So we're getting rid of the phrase excluding the properties monitored.
How about excluding
No,
seasonal
you
homes?
just, you need to reset every September 1st.
So this is
Yeah,
an
just put in
addition,
a sentence that
an
says you
additional
start
sentence
over.
at the end.
I think all you have to do is just say a new random sampling program will be initiated every calendar year or fiscal year or whatever phrase.
How about, why can't you say will be picked with a random number generator that is reset every 12 months?
Yeah, they could do that.
I think that's
Okay,
great,
That works.
with a random number generator that is
And
reset.
if you reset it at the end of the summer season.
Well, we can figure that out
We
later.
can figure that out later.
All right,
Is that our-
every September.
Yes.
Right?
But we still have some that would be monitored every other month anyway, right?
Yeah, the probationary
Yeah.
ones are gonna be
Right. Okay, that is reset, are we saying every year?
Every September.
Every September,
Yeah,
okay.
pick a month, September.
Okay, good. That solves two problems. Any other comments on that paragraph?
Instead of do not meet, would it be safe just to put exceed the 10 milligram or whatever standard we put there? Because that's our concern, right? Is if
Yes.
it exceeds it. It's clear.
Yes, to exceed. I
Yeah.
think that's good.
Okay.
To exceed.
To
And you see the
exceed.
spacing there, see on the 10 milligrams per liter.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. 4.5, record keeping. Records will be kept by the RME for each property within the watershed and will be tied to the municipal GIS. Records shall include engineered and as-built plans, monthly presumably, but question, water readings from transponder-equipped water meters at each property, monitoring results for total nitrogen, O&M records, and pumping records.
See, I don't think we want that monthly in parentheses anymore or highlighted. I think we've settled on.
Okay? All right, operation and maintenance, 4.6. Systems will be maintained based on the manufacturer's recommendations, but not less than twice annually. If no monitoring has occurred within 1 month prior to inspection, a nutrient sample will be taken to inform that inspection. The RME may contract with licensed inspectors approved and trained by the IA vendors to perform O&M on the systems in the watershed.
So how often are they inspected?
Twice a year.
So you're potentially going to have 3 data points for
Yes.
each system each year.
No, wait, what, the first sentence says systems will be maintained,
Maintain.
not inspected. It says
This is
maintained
maintenance.
twice a year.
Yep.
Yeah, no,
No.
Ron's, they're both right, because there's a difference between maintenance, which sort of
Maintained
implies in fixing things and inspecting them,
Inspection.
and
So,
inspecting them.
Maintained and inspected?
Or just systems will be maintained based on manufacturer's recommendations, but inspections will be not less than twice annually. Not less often than twice annually.
Well,
That's
I
what
would
you,
drop
that's what is
but
meant.
and just
I
say
think.
and inspected, not less than.
Yep.
Yes.
and, all right.
Yeah, just get rid of the but. And this may be too much polishing, but instead of 1 month, I would say 30 days prior to inspection, right, is a little.
Okay.
Wait a
Is a
minute.
little bit
Systems would
tighter.
maintain-
Okay. 1 month, 30 days.
Within 30 days.
Within
Well,
30
Within 1
days.
month
Yeah.
and within 30 days, okay.
Within 30 days of inspection?
Right, within 30 days of inspection.
No, prior to. Well, the has occurred takes care of that, okay.
Yeah.
Has occurred within 30 days of inspection. A nutrient sample will be taken to inform that inspection. Okay? Next page,
Now-
last page.
One quick
Oh,
thing here.
sorry.
Instead of nutrient, should it just say nitrogen? Because obviously there's other nutrients that could be
Well, I think.
assayed.
I think we want to leave that open to discussion.
Okay.
Because George thought the DEP would insist on another suite of things,
Ah.
which wouldn't cost any more to do. In other
Okay.
words,
Yep,
um,
Phosphorus.
the one that is expensive to do is oxygen demand.
yeah.
And I think he's already been in discussions with DEP to dump that.
Yeah,
Okay.
So there might be another, there
Right.
might be a suite of, when the inspector comes, he's not just going to take a nitrogen sample, he's going to
Right.
look at a bunch
Yep.
of other stuff.
All right, so nutrients stays put. Okay, 4.7, pumping. Septic systems will be pumped every 5 years by RME-approved contractors or as determined by inspection in compliance with 310 CMR 1535. Any comment? Ron?
I was just wondering, when I read this, I was just wondering if it will be pumped at a minimum every 5 years, but that second half kind of,
Covers that.
Or as determined? Now,
yeah, or as determined by
Right.
inspection in compliance with,
So the inspector's going to look in, and if there's 6 inches of scum on the top of the system, he's going to say, basta, pump it.
yeah.
Yeah.
If it's a seasonal house that, gets used 8 weeks a year, he may be able to look in there and say, I don't need to pump it for 8 years.
So this is based on the inspection more than anything else, right?
Yes.
So the 5-year thing would be,
I-
at a minimum, you would expect them to do it
every 5 years.
every 5 years, right?
Do you want to add 310 CMR to the glossary with maybe a web link to the bylaw, or?
I don't,
Just
that's,
leave it
for
as
D- we're this, we're
Not
sending
DEP
this
knows
to
what it is.
Yeah.
DEP knows what it is.
DEP will know this. Okay, so I'm hearing two different things. Are we going to leave it every 5 years, or are we putting in, I'm looking to the working group here.
I think we should leave it 5 years.
I like it the way it is. I mean,
You
I'm
like
not
it?
in the working
Okay,
group, but
very
I,
good.
I
it
do
looks
too.
good to me.
All right, 4.8, reporting. The RME will report compliance to DEP quarterly. Compliance may be verified by any one of the following, and then there are 4 options. All systems meet the regulatory standard, 10 milligrams. Some failures balanced against systems bettering the standard, and some properties being occupied seasonally. C, the Sentinel Station meeting and maintaining the mandated nitrogen concentration. And D, the watershed load reported quarterly based on monthly water usage and the moving average of accumulated monitoring test data for total nitrogen. Well, this sounds a little complicated.
Yes,
And item C is the one that has me the most concerned.
Okay, all right. Let's start at the top. So A is they meet the standard of 10 milligrams, I think.
Well,
all
the most
all
important thing is
systems.
by any one of. So
Which-
if this is accepted by DEP,
That's, I said that, that's
it
right.
gives us all the freedom we could reasonably ask for.
right.
I see,
To meet the
exactly.
standard
That's what I like about it.
in the way
Okay.
you want.
All right.
In other words, yeah, we're pouring all this nitrogen in,
Yeah.
but hey, look at C. We-
Yeah.
It's not in the estuary, we don't know where it's going, but
Okay,
We did our
Attenuation must
job.
be real, and here we go, right?
okay. All right, fine. Any other comments?
Interesting, okay.
There are many different ways to
Yeah,
get.
no, I didn't appreciate the qualifying statement
Okay.
above A, B, C,
Any
and D.
one of, all right. 4.9 is the fees in lieu of sewer fees. Homeowners will be assessed a charge semi-annually that will cover monitoring, pumping, and maintenance. The charges will be the same for each home. I'm not sure you want the word home.
Each property.
Each property.
For
Each
each.
property.
Yep. And may I suggest that we just substitute fee for charge in both cases? Because
yeah.
Well, it's.
we've used the term
homeowners
fee
will be
already for these
assessed-
other things. Isn't
Okay.
it just another fee?
Okay, will be assessed a fee semi-annually, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And everywhere the word charge is,
yeah,
or
Yeah.
charge, you want
Yeah.
to change to fee.
Yeah, just substitute
The fee.
fee, just
Mhm.
consistent.
okay,
Now,
be the same.
these
Okay.
are, these systems are entitled to betterment. So if they,
Not necessarily.
well, betterment could be through the county loan program, but it's kind
No, it
of
wouldn't be a betterment.
No,
It's not a
I don't
betterment,
think
it's a
so.
worsening.
No,
or something.
So we're saying that we as a municipality may provide an initiative
a
grant
grant.
that would be sort of the same thing as the 30-70 split we do when we sewer something.
Right.
And so in lieu of a betterment, we might be offering these grants.
The 70% equivalent.
There's no
If we-
percentage.
It's not determined at the moment.
I know, but you're saying
Just the
30-70,
concept.
the way it is now, the homeowner pays 70.
So, I mean,
And
as
which
an
is a
example,
betterment.
we know what we did in West Falmouth. So something similar to the project that we did in West Falmouth.
Right, we gave them money, okay, for doing it,
Right.
putting it in. And then, but if they can't afford the balance, the other part, these are rich people, these are
Yeah, but
waterfront
they
properties.
go and they apply for the
For the
Loans.
septic
for the
system loan.
programs, but it's not a betterment. It's a loan from the county.
Okay.
Okay? So we've straightened out fees, and then 5.0 is the glossary. All right. Good work.
So I
Any
would
other
think
input?
once we doctor this up, the next steps would be for Eric and Virginia to take it down to DEP and have a discussion and drop it in their lap and say, please react to this.
We don't need a vote on this?
We don't need a vote, and because Eric's not here, he will want to see the document as it's now been dressed up.
I'm just going to send it around to everybody.
Yes, right, exactly. Okay. Oh,
Absolutely.
of course. Right. All right, we're done with the sausage. Okay, next item on the agenda is reports of members and staff. Do we have any reports?
We have one report, unless you guys have something first.
Go ahead, see it?
I'm just making sure I get dug up. We were invited to a USGS workshop. It was Tuesday, and the focus of it was for USGS to share some of the data collection that it's been doing throughout the region and present some of the preliminary data and let the world know that they care about their customers and are going to be producing reports so we can start to use some of this information. And I was just going to go through the different studies that are being done, because all of them are interesting and relate to the work that we're doing. They are looking at trends in nitrogen concentrations in Narragansett Bay. They are looking at Herring River Salt Marsh in Wellfleet. And on the Wellfleet project, I thought this was fascinating. And John, you probably know the area. There's it's Herring River Salt Marsh, and it's owned by the National Seashore. And there's a culvert there. And they do want to do a widening and an opening of the inlet. So they're opening the inlet into Herring River to restore the salt marsh, but it flushes right into Wellfleet Harbor where all the shellfish aquaculture grants are. So there's a great deal of concern that if you open this area up, what's going to happen in terms of sediment flux and nutrient flux going into that very, very productive aquaculture area. So USGS, because it is the National Seashore, USGS can work for them and is doing data collection and monitoring to get baseline conditions for the tidal flux, the nutrient fluxes, the sediment levels. So they're doing quite a substantial amount of monitoring to understand existing conditions and are concurrently going through environmental impact reports and permitting notices of intent for this, going from what is a 6-foot opening to a 162-foot opening.
6 foot?
Yeah, they've got this little
6 foot?
culvert that's got battens, right.
It has clappers on it.
It has flappers
6 foot
on
to
it,
100 and what?
62 feet.
Oh my.
So it's going from a trickle where there's a 10-foot
Yeah,
tide
huge
Yeah.
tides up there.
to this massive opening. So,
I
right.
think,
So if they can get that
I
permitted.
think that the gentleman from Wellfleet showed us a picture of that valve when he was here a couple of years ago.
Kurt Felix?
He was here. and he showed
That's
us.
good memory.
How many acres
Is,
are upstream of this culvert?
Huge amount.
Oh, it is, really huge.
There are going to
15,000.
be a number of homes
It's a
that go
15,
underwater.
it's a huge, it's a 1,500 maybe, but it's a huge, and it's part of the National Seashore.
Yeah, okay.
The whole half
And it's,
mile.
right now it's a sinusoides marsh, right? It's all freshwater marsh, up there, if I remember correctly.
It's not all freshwater, it's
Oh,
not,
okay.
Of course.
it's not. So it's a real, so that was a really neat thing to see.
So what are the potential downsides? I mean, the one that's fascinating, I mean, I could see that there might be different velocities that might be bad for the shellfish. But could you have too much nutrient?
Sediment.
Oh, okay, you mentioned nutrient. You can't have
Well,
too much nutrient,
It's,
right?
it's more than that, right? Because you're introducing salt water with tons of sulfate, which has, a large amount of oxidizing potential, like 30 times more than the dissolved oxygen in the water column. So all the stored carbon in that freshwater marsh.
But the aquaculture are downstream of this.
Yeah, they're out in the harbor itself.
So their salinity is not going to be
It's not salinity.
increased.
It's not salinity.
It's an oxygen demand.
It's
the
oxygen
It's
demand.
nutrients and oxygen and sediment
And the
as well.
salt marsh is peat. So, but one of the things that was interesting is right now, the peat goes dry. And so the thought is that if you have this covered, you won't have as much decomposition happening. So overall, there may be lower nutrients. But it's really one of those, I mean, this is a huge experiment. And USGS is on it. And it's actually John Coleman who's doing it, who's more of a senior person. He's been there for a while. We also got a great presentation on how they're doing nutrient loading in New Hampshire, looking at stream loads, some significant stream loads coming in from some of the watersheds in New Hampshire. And I thought the coolest thing of the day was to understand some of the high nutrient loading that they see in their samples. They thought there may be breaks in the sewer lines. So there are these dogs that can sniff human-derived nitrogen. And apparently they are very effective nitrogen sensors. So they brought these dogs out and did and even have a QAP for these, a quality assurance program plan for dogs, to get to where the source points of this human-derived nitrogen going into the streams is. I thought that was quite
And there's a market for this.
fascinating.
There are enough applications nationally that it makes sense to train your dog to do this.
It
That's
seems like
fascinating.
they've moved to New England. So the next one was looking at real-time monitoring, which is something that gets everybody really exciting. So there are these sensors, and they have to wrap them in copper and put other sacrificial zinc anodes. But in New York, around Long Island Sound, they've been able to put these every 15-minute interval monitoring sensors. So everybody's thinking, great, we can stop doing our grab samples till you find out that the price for one station for one season, not including data analysis, is $60,000. And you realize that the grab samples are not going anywhere fast. And the 15-minute intervals, the other thing is, what do you do with all this data? And one of their poster child for all of this was you could predict a fish kill. So if you watch the dissolved oxygen cycling, spiking and dropping and spiking and dropping and then tanking, you maybe could predict a significant fish kill. But then the question is, well, what would you do about it? Put in aerators or something, so it was. But the cost is still pretty high, and there's still a lot of fouling with these in situ continuous monitoring sensors. But we talked about that, and then they talked about this great project in a town called Falmouth, where they are monitoring groundwater nitrogen concentrations and fluxes and directions of flow. Getting the contours, in anticipation of a sewer being installed, to understand how the hydrology may or may not change, and then the nitrogen concentrations may or may not change. So Tim McCobb, who's been doing this in Falmouth, showed the wells that he's installed and some of the preliminary data showing some pretty high. And where he is in mid-peninsula, pretty high nitrate concentrations and not a lot
What
of ammonia. So-
peninsula are you talking about?
This is Mara Vista.
Mara Vista.
This
Okay,
is Mara
thank you.
Vista.
Yep, the Mara Vista
So this
Peninsula.
is the before picture for the sewer.
Right, so he presented that.
Before
Before the
sewer that's
hookups.
there now.
The sewer's now been installed and people are now hooking up. In fact, that
Oh, okay.
announcement I brought. But the point is to know what the groundwater looks like and the concentrations of nitrate in the Mara Vista Peninsula, or at least a good solid chunk of it, border to border, before the sewer begins to remove all of this steady input.
Are there some on the Shorewood side?
No, I'm sorry, by Shorewood side, you mean, are there some on the east side of the Mara Vista Peninsula? Yes, it goes, they have,
Actually, I meant to say on the east side of Great Bay and Coonamessett River.
no,
Nope, this is just.
no, this is just Mara Vista, just within the sewer service area.
Okay, just that side.
And the things that he found sort of mimic or echo what they saw at Seacoast and what we also saw at Acapesket, which is really shallow groundwater that's fairly slower moving. And the divide, an east-west divide. And they are doing there are 3 more sampling rounds are scheduled. And they believe that in a year and a half, the report will be out.
Okay,
So that was their schedule. I thought that was interesting, March of 2018.
Okay.
And then Marcel Belival talked about the PRB project on the Cape and talked about the screening tool and the 5 towns that had initial data collected and the decision to go with Dennis and what some of the things that they've learned, even though all the pictures he had were from Falmouth. We apparently were the most photogenic site, but they are looking at moving forward in
Okay.
Dennis.
This has already happened, this meeting?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and then just to
And,
round
and the
out.
last thing is that
Oh, sorry.
they are planning to circulate the PowerPoint presentations, and when they do, we'll send it out to everybody, so you all
Okay.
have copies of those presentations.
All right. So the town has sent out a notice, it's actually been mailed and emailed to residents within the Little Pond Sewer Service Area, announcing an informational session which is going to be held May 3rd, Wednesday at 7 PM in Morse Pond School. The process for connecting to the sewer is now ready to begin. And as we remember from a year ago, there were lots of questions about permits, and some people had questions about the grinder pump specifically, or betterments, or just anything. So the DPW is going to have this general informational session, and the public should know as a whole that if you're within the sewer service area, you can now plan to connect.
What time is it?
7 o'clock
On the 3rd.
on May 3rd.
This
Yep.
is like the meeting they held a
Yep.
year or two ago, right?
Yeah, that's right, July of 2016 was the,
I went to that previous meeting,
Yes.
and one of the contractors said, was I a homeowner there? And I said, no, I'm a member of the committee that was somewhat responsible for implementing this. He said, don't worry, I won't tell anyone.
Yeah,
All
don't
right.
show up with a target.
okay, vote minutes of prior meeting, this is April 6th. Everyone had a copy? Is there a motion?
Motion to approve
I'll
the minutes?
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Our next meeting will be the first Thursday in May. I did not bring the exact date with me.
4th, I think.
John, if you could, Steve, if you could tell me.
The 4th.
May 4th, okay? May 4th, 3:30? Absolutely. Doug Brown? Yes, yeah.
Hi, Doug Brown again. I wonder if there's any news about the Mill Pond, the work that was done?
Good
So I
question.
can report to the East Falmouth Village? Is that
Yes.
anything new?
That contract is going through not the Water Quality Management Committee.
And do we know? Okay.
The scope of work has been sent, the contract has been sent, but we are not tracking that because it's going through the manager's office.
Okay.
Can we ask for reports from them from time to time?
We can?
And the second question is there any word or information about the aeration that was tried by Hui at Great Pond in front of Falmouth Port there?
Right.
I think it was MBL.
That was MBL.
That was MBL. MBL. Sia, what do we know on that one?
The report has been submitted to the Marine and Environmental Services Department,
Okay.
and the plan is to have MBL give a presentation soon.
But the work is finished.
Work is finished, the final report's written, and it's been submitted.
So I can check MES and see if they can share it.
Okay,
But you,
and,
you can't tell us the bottom line.
I haven't studied the bottom line. I'd like Ann and Ken to come in.
Yeah.
so
present the bottom line.
we're looking at a time to schedule for them to present.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
This is sort of old news, but the April 5th PRB meeting that Matt went to, are those proceedings available anywhere?
Yes.
Okay, do you know if there's a link or something I could?
I haven't gotten them the link?
I got it. I
Uh,
can forward it to you to forward it to the committee, or I
Yeah,
can just send it
just
to the
forward it to
committee.
everyone. Yeah,
Forward
no, I
it to
didn't, I
everyone.
didn't
Okay.
get
That
the
would be
link.
great.
Yeah, I've been wanting to try to catch up on that stuff.
Okay,
Yep.
all right.
Because I didn't give you enough to read. I didn't give you enough to read already?
Oh, well, I've been working on it.
Good for you. That's fantastic.
Okay. Any other comments, reports to bring before? Okay, motion to adjourn,
So moved.
Yes,
second. All those in favor?
yes.
Aye.
Regina, can you tell me again the meeting plan to help